Hello folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to create these glass profile cards with HTML and CSS. They have this see-through hazy background which makes them look like they're made of glass or clear plastic. Now this by default only works in Chrome. You can set it up in Firefox as well, but it takes a bit of tweaking, so if you want to follow along then just use Chrome. So let's get straight into it. I'm using Sublime Text, which means that I can just type out HTML, hit tab, and then the autocomplete will create the basic structure for me. Now in the title tag I'm going to call this profile cards. Save that. I need to refresh the first time, and there we go, it's coming up at the top. And now I can start actually creating the profile cards area. So I'm going to wrap them within a section. I'll give this section a class. So we'll say section class is equal to cards, and then each of the cards inside that is going to be within a div. So I can create a div, give this a class of card singular, and then I can start putting in all the contents for it. So the first thing I need is the image, so the profile picture. I'll break this up over a couple of lines. So first it's going to be the class, and that's going to be profile pic. Then underneath I'm going to have the actual file, so the source, and I'm just going to use Unsplash for this. So https source.unsplash.com, and I'm going to use a random picture which is 100 by 100 pixels. And then lastly, I need to give it an alt. So the alt is going to be profile pic. Okay, let's close this one out, save that, and there we go. It's just loaded a random picture from Unsplash. Then the next thing is going to be the name of the person that's going to be on this card. So let's go with John Doe. Then after that, a little description, this paragraph. So it's kind of like an about me section. I'm just going to use lorem here. So if I type out lorem, and I'm not sure if I can use numbers here, lorem 9. No, it doesn't work. So if I do lorem, hit tab, it gives me this lorem ipsum text, but I need to get rid of it because it's way too much. So close that p tag. Okay, there we go. So I've got a profile picture, the name of the person, and then a little about me section. And actually for now, that's all I want to do in the HTML. So let's jump over and start doing a little bit of initial styling. So in my CSS, oh, actually, I need to make sure that I link the CSS into my HTML document. So within the head, just above the title, I'm going to add a tag that says link, hit tab there. So rel style sheet, and then the location for it, well, they're all in the same folder, so I just need to say style.css. So that's the name of my style sheet file. So if I save that now, it's going to be pulling this through. So any styling that I add is going to be automatically applied to my document. There's a few things I apply by default. So margin 0, padding 0, and box sizing of border box. If I save, you'll notice everything bunches up together. So all of the default margins and paddings and so on have been overridden now. Then the next thing to do is start styling the body. Now if I inspect this page at the moment, the body of the document is just as big as the content that's within it. So it's only as tall as what it contains. But I actually want the body to take up the entirety of the page. So I'm going to define a height, and I'm going to use the VH unit here. So this just means it's going to take the entire height of the viewport, regardless of how big your screen or the window is. And the next thing I want to do is load in a background image. So say background image, and I've got this in a file here, so bg. So I need to say URL and give the name file. Now in my case, because it's also in the same folder as the index and the style sheet, I don't have to give it any other like folder names like images / anything like that. So if I save that now, there we go, my background has come through. There's a couple of things I need to do to it. So let's give it a position, background, position, so we'll center it. Okay, that's a bit better, and just make sure that it covers the entirety of the page. So background size, cover. Okay, there we go. So it just gets eventually either shrunk or stretched to fit the display window. All right, now let's do a little bit of styling on the card itself. So the card, remember, is within a div, which has a class of card. So I can actually just target this card. And when you're targeting a class, you need to start it with a full stop. So we target card class. And first of all, just so I can see what I'm working with here, because at the moment it's kind of just blending into the background that's there, I'm going to give it a defined background color. And we'll say RGBA 255. So it's just going to be white. But this last value here is going to be the opacity. So that's why I added an A here rather than just RGB. So this, if I set this to 1 and save this, you'll see that it just gives me a solid white background. But if I set it to 0.5, it actually becomes a little bit see-through, and that's what I'm going to be using to get this glass effect. So this is working fine, but you can see a problem straight away, which is that it's just taken up the entire width of the page. And essentially what's happening here, if we go back to the HTML, this card div is within the cards section. I haven't styled the cards section yet, so everything is just going to the size of its parent. So if I style the cards class, I can give it a width. So I'll say width of 70%. And just temporarily, actually, I'm going to give it a border on px solid red, so just to see what's going on. So there is the outline of the section, and then within it is the card just taking up all of the available space. Now width of 70% is fine, but on bigger screens it's just going to keep stretching out. So actually let's give it a max width, 1000 pixels. So nothing changed there, but if I was to shift this across, and especially on the bigger monitors, it would limit itself to 1000 pixels. Also want to give it a height, so we'll go with 30 rem. Okay, so now you can see what's happened. The section has extended, but the card within it hasn't stretched to meet it. So now I can see the difference between the cards class and the card class. And then lastly, what I'm going to do here is set how I want this to be displayed. Now I could use flexbox here, but because I'm going to have these profile cards stacked up next to each other, essentially in a form of a grid, I'm just going to use grid for this. So my cards section is going to be displayed as a grid container. And that means that all the items within it will become grid items, and they're just going to take up all the available space that they're given. Now I'm going to have 3 cards within this, so I'm going to define that explicitly. I'm going to say grid template columns, and I want 3 of them, so I can just use repeat 3 times, and then I define the size. So I'm just going to say 1 fraction, which means that it's going to divide them into equal sections for each card. So if I save this now, you can see that the space available is still the same, but then the card only takes up 1/3 of that. Now I'm going to go back to styling the cards and the body itself. So I just want to make sure that my positioning is correct. Everything is just sitting in the top left at the moment. So what we'll do is set the body to display flex. This takes it and turns it into a flex container. And then I can say justify content center. That moves all of the content, which is just this section, into the middle. And because I have a height defined as well, I can say align items center. And that's going to take that section, put it right in the middle of my page. Now a couple of little things here to affect the font. So we'll say font family. I like to use Helvetica a lot. So Helvetica sans serif. Save that. And let's just align the text center and give it a color of 444444. Okay. Now we'll do a little bit of styling on the content of the card. So underneath here, I'll target the profile pic first of all. Say profile pic, and at the moment it's coming through as a square, but I actually wanted to have a round profile picture. So to do that, you just need to set the border radius. So say border radius and set it to 50%, and that'll convert it into a circle. And on top of that, I also had a border all the way around it. So this kind of ring that surrounded the profile picture. So I'm going to say that it's going to have a 5 pixel solid border, and it's kind of like a lime green color. And there we go. Now I want to style that H1 element. I'll give it a font size of 1.5 rem and a margin of 1.5 rem top and bottom, and then 0 left and right, just so it spaces out a little bit there. Now a couple of other things I wanted to add to this profile card is the stripes, the color stripes that I had top and bottom. So I'll go back to the HTML document. Let's just hide that panel there. And I'm actually going to split up this div a little bit. So I've got my card class, but within it, I'm going to have another div, which is going to be called stripe. That's the class is going to be stripe space top. So it's actually going to have 2 classes to it. And it doesn't need to have any content within that div here. I can just close it out. And then all of the stuff underneath, I'm going to wrap in another div. And I'm going to give this a class of card content. So this profile image and H1 and the P, they're all going to be indented, and they're going to go within their own div. So I close that one out. And then lastly, I can add another div here, which is going to be stripe again. So it takes the same class, but it's going to be bottom. And then we close out that div, and there we go. So now if I save this, nothing immediately changes, but then the structure has updated a little bit. Now I can go back into my CSS, And just below where I've got my card, I'm going to target the stripe class. So this is going to affect both the top and bottom ones. And what I want to do is first of all give it a width of 100%, so it takes up the entire width of the card. Height of, let's say, 5 rem. Okay, so you can't actually see anything there because it doesn't have any real content, but it moved everything away. So there is some space being taken up by it now. So let's give it a background color so we can actually see it on the screen. F4A261. Okay, there we go. So that's one of the stripes. And let's say position absolute. So I'm actually going to position these stripes top and bottom, and I want them to be taken out of the positioning for the card so that the stripe kind of is in line with this profile picture. So to do that, I'm going to define the position of them absolutely, which means that I need to go into my cards or card. Yeah, we'll do it in card actually. So underneath background color, I will say position relative. And now you can see everything's moved back up. So essentially I have taken the stripes out of the structure of the rest of the card. So they are going to be positioned relative to it. And now that's all I need to do for the stripe itself, but now I can target top and bottom to position them separately. Well, top is already up there, so I don't actually need to do anything to that just yet, but I will style it a little bit later, so I'm going to add a placeholder for it. And then bottom, well, obviously that needs to be positioned at the bottom, and because it's got a fixed positioning, or rather an absolute positioning, I can say that if I give it a bottom offset of 0, then it's going to, it should jump down, but it doesn't seem to have. Unless I've made a typo in my HTML, stripe, I did make a typo. There we go. So now I've got these two stripes, top and bottom, coming up. But you notice that they're overriding the profile picture that's underneath. So I actually want to set the Z index of these stripes to be behind the rest of the content. So if I set it to -1, then they drop backwards. Now let's just round out the corners of these. So because I'm going to be using the same radius dimension, I'm actually going to define a variable for this. So you go right back up to the top of the document, and I will have this colon root, and I'll define a variable called rad for radius. And I'll set this to 2 rem. So now rather than typing this out every time and changing it individually, I can just set it in one place. So my top and bottom panels, or these stripes, now need to have this border radius, but I actually need to have it only on either the top 2 corners or the bottom 2 corners, depending on which stripe it is. So for the top one, I'll say border radius is going to be var, so I can access that variable of rad, which is the radius. And this is going to be the top left and top right, and bottom left and bottom right are 0. So if I save that now, you can see I'm getting these curved ends at the top. Behind it, the card is still visible as rectangles, so we're going to address that in a second. But first, I just want to do the same for the bottom one. But of course, I need to make sure that I flip it, so it's not the top corners, it's now the bottom corners. So it's 0, 0 for the top, and then the var for the bottom. There we go. So now let's go back to the card and just add a little bit more styling to it. So we've got the background color, and let's put in that border radius. Now of course this doesn't need to have all of these variables because the border radius is applied in the same way all around the 4 corners. And there we go, now it disappears and matches the stripes. I'm actually going to get rid of this border for the card section because you can kind of see what's going on now. And to make this card pop out of the screen a little bit, I'm going to add a shadow. So this just gives it a bit of a 3D effect. We'll say box shadow 0, 0, 5 pixels, 2 pixels. And then I'm going to use RGBA again so that I can add some transparency to it. Save that, and there you go, it's given a little bit of a shadow, so it looks like it's raised from the screen. Now the positioning within the card itself isn't great. Everything is just kind of stacked up from top to bottom, and it doesn't really come down as it needs to. So remember, I added a div class here for card content, and that's what contains all of this profile information. Well, I need to go and actually style that. So I've got the card here, so just underneath there I can say card content. And first of all, let's set the height to 100%, so it takes up the entire height of the card. And then I'm going to use flexbox here. So all the contents within it are going to become flex items within a flex container. And by default, it's arranged in a row. So actually everything is stacked up next to each other. Now I need to make sure that I change that to be displayed as a column. There we go. So now everything is stacked up on top of each other. But again, the spacing isn't great and the profile picture is being, extended quite a bit. So let's just align the items centrally. Okay, there we go, that's much better. And finally add in some padding to rem should do it. And there we go. So that adds everything down and spaces things out a lot better than before. Now, one other thing that I want to add to these cards before they're finished, and I can add in that glass effect, is the social links at the bottom. And for that, I'm just going to be using Font Awesome. So if you've not used it before, there's different ways of using Font Awesome, but essentially you would go onto the website, you can download the files from here, and then the files that you need are, well, if I bring up the panel again, there's this web fonts folder that you're going to get from here, and the CSS folder. So let's hide that again. What I'm going to be doing is within the head of the document, I've already linked my existing style sheet, which is my style.css. I now need to call through the Font Awesome style sheet. So I'll say link rel is style sheet, and I'm not even going to bother with the type. I'll just say reference is, so this is actually within a folder. So it's within this CSS folder. So I need to say CSS / all.min.css. Okay, and that's all I need to do, and that's going to pull them through. So now I can go into this section here. I've got my card content div. Let's go back to the display here. And that contains all of my profile information. So right at the bottom of it, I want to add in those social links, but I'm going to have them within their own div. So I'll say div class is equal to socials, so I can style them and lay out the format properly. Close that div, and then individually here, I just add them as I elements. So give them each a class, and this class depends on, well, essentially determines which element or which icon you're using from Font Awesome. So I've already pulled all these through from the Font Awesome website previously, so I kind of know where they are when I've written them down. So we use that one. Then there was another one for YouTube, and another one for Twitter, and then lastly I had one for Instagram. Okay, so if I save this now, there you go, you can see them appearing down there, and it's fine, they're loading in through exactly as they should be, but they're not positioned at all in the right place. So I can go back into my style sheet and just play around with some of the styling here. Now basically what's happening, if I just inspect this for a second and I go in here, this is my flexbox display of the contents within the card, and it's just taking up all the available, or rather it's taking up the space that it needs to, and it's leaving all this available space. So what I want to do is have one of the elements just grow to take up that space. Well, because I want these socials to be sitting right at the bottom every time, and I want the rest of it to be sitting at the top, it's just a paragraph that needs to grow. So if I go back in here, and right at the bottom I can just look for my p tag, and all I need to add is flex grow. So if I say flex grow is set to 1, you can see that these have just moved down to the bottom. And if I inspect it again, the space that was there is now all being taken up. There we go. The space that was there is now being taken up by this p tag. So no matter how much text I put in here, whether it's not enough to fill out all the space, it's going to take it up anyway. So now lastly, I can just space out these a little bit so that they're not just sitting right next to each other. So we'll target the socials class, and what should we do? So we'll go width of 90%. And well, actually I want to display flex on it as well. So that's going to change how they're displayed. So now it's going to be taking up 90% of the card space, but you see they're all in a row starting right at the bottom. So I actually want to justify them as well. So I could say justify content center as I've done previously. That just moves them all next to each other. I actually want to maintain space between them all. Well, for that I can literally just use space between. There we go. It takes the 90% available space and then it spaces them out with an equal gap between all the icons. Now I don't actually want them to have this grey font color, so let's just give them a color of white, just so they contrast a little bit better. There we go. So what I can do now is go back to my HTML and just take this div of card and then just copy it down a couple of times so I can make 3 cards. So we'll put another one underneath here and another one still down there. Now if I save this, they're going to load in, but they're going to have all the same image. Now to address that, all I need to do is just change the size of it. So I'll just go from 100 by 100 to 100 by 101 for the second one, and then 102 for the third one. And now I'm going to have 3 different images loaded in. So that's good, but now you can see they're all stacked up next to each other, and that's because I haven't defined a spacing for my grid. So within my cards class, after I've defined my grid, I can also say, it's not grid, that's deprecated, it's just gap of 2 rem, and it's going to put a gap between each of the cards. And then one more little thing to add is when I hover the mouse over it, I want to turn it into a pointer. So just underneath my card class, I'm going to have a hover state. So we'll say card hover, the cursor becomes a pointer. So now when I mouse over, you can see it actually turns into a little hand. So the only remaining thing now is just to make this a little bit blurry. So you can see right now it's actually transparent and it's kind of giving me that glass effect. But just to make it a little bit better, I go into my card class here and I add a backdrop effect. So there's going to be a backdrop filter. Where is it? Backdrop filter. And it's just going to be a blur effect. So we'll say blur 5 pixels. Save that. And there you go. The colors of these instantly changed. But you can see now this is blurred the background. So if I change this to say 15, it's going to be more noticeable. So you can see more of a transition. It's actually become quite a bit more opaque. So 5 pixels is quite a nice look here. You can see it's kind of like a glass effect coming through. So that's one way to quickly set up these profile cards. So I hope that was useful and thanks for watching.